This is the second lesson for Chapter 5 of A Wrinkle in Time, where we are gathering evidence. So I left off in the middle of the last lesson. However, I am anticipating that you didn't watch it, that you were in the classroom with me, raising your hand, and we were talking. Just in case, I'm going to pick up where I left off with the last lesson and kind of talk about what you might need to go back to if you missed some of that in the in-person lesson. So let's take a look at our gathering evidence paper. It looks like this. I want to remind you of what information you need to fill in and what goes where, because this tends to be what we forget. The left-hand column, we have a detail evidence. And I want you to make sure, so when it says quote about the first dimension, which this should be filled in, you already have words directly from the book recorded here about the first dimension. You have quotation marks around it. Next to that, you have recorded the page that that quote was found on, the page that those words came from. In this third column is your inference or reasoning. You may not have finished this yet. You need to make sure that you go back and do this. This is your spot where you are going to explain what these quotes mean and how everything connects together. Hopefully you gathered all of the evidence that you need for the first prompt, which was the reader learns what a tesseract is, explain the 5 dimensions, and connect these to your own description of what a tesseract is. So then you have these quotes. You've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then you also have some kind of a quote about the tesseract. Perhaps it was the one right after the 5 dimensions were described. Perhaps you have something about the way that they're traveling. That is up to you. And then you are explaining and connecting all of these ideas together. And these are pretty some deep, in-depth ideas, trying to make these abstract connections about a theory in science that they're trying to make seem real in this book. In my video lesson previously, I read through one conflict. That conflict was when they traveled and they were tessering. They were using the tesseract to get quickly from one place to another. They were going to stop off at another planet before going to wherever Father is. But whoops, Mrs. Witch, who isn't always all there, it's not substantial, she's not tangible, she tried to stop on a 2-dimensional planet. But the children can't breathe. That 2 dimensions is flat. So pick a quote about that conflict, and then you also need to explain that. So let's look back at the prompt to make sure you have what you need. Once the children learn about the tesseract, the crisis, once again, let's fix this. The crisis begins to develop more. Describe 2 conflicts using specific text details that occur in Chapter 5. So you're going to pick out some quotes about the conflict, and you're going to, this is over here is where you're going to describe those conflicts more in detail. Currently, I am not making you write out your paragraph answers or your ACE answers. However, I do want complete sentences in this other box. If you did not read that conflict that I just talked about, you either need to go back in the book and read it yourself or go back to the video from yesterday and have me read it to you. Now we're going to finish Chapter 5. We're going to be looking for that second conflict. And something I want to point out, because if you didn't watch this video, I was super cheesy in the last one, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. If you remember in the classroom, I asked you to raise your hand when you heard what could be used as a quote in the paper or on your paper. So be thinking about that still. Be looking for those quotes and those details. You don't have to raise your hand at home, but goofy me, you might see my hand go up every once in a while if I see one I really like. So use those as some clues. We are going to pick up, so if you have the yellow book, page 81. If you have the black book, the top of page 92. I did it again. I stopped at this random spot in my yellow book, and it was the top of the page in the other book. Just makes me feel good. But anyways, those of you with the yellow book, we are on the right-hand side of the page, the second paragraph where it says, I am sorry. Follow along with me, have your notes handy. I am sorry, Mrs. Witch's voice came again, but there was more than a hint of amusement in it. It is not funny, Charles Wallace gave a childish stamp of his foot. Mrs. Who's glasses shone out, and the rest of her appeared more slowly behind them. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, she smiled broadly. Prospero, in The Tempest. I do like that play. I'm surprised she doesn't know who that is. Who wrote that play? Shakespeare? You didn't do it on purpose, Charles demanded. Oh, my darling, of course not, Mrs. Whatsit said quickly. It was just a very understandable mistake. It's very difficult for Mrs. Witch to think in a corporeal way. She wouldn't hurt you deliberately. You know that. And it's really a very pleasant little planet and rather amusing to be flat. We always enjoy our visits there. Where are we now then? Charles Wallace demanded. And why? In Orion's belt. We have a friend here and we want you to have a look at your own planet. When are we going home? Meg asked anxiously. What about Mother? What about the twins? They'll be terribly worried about us when we didn't come in at bedtime. Well, Mother must be frantic by now. She and the twins and Fort will have been looking and looking for us, and of course we aren't there to be found. Now don't worry, pet, Mrs. Whatsit said cheerfully. We took care of that before we left. Your mother has had enough to worry her with you and Charles to cope with, and not knowing about your father without our adding to her anxieties. We took a time wrinkle as well as a space wrinkle. It's very easy to do if you just know how. What do you mean? Meg asked plaintively. Please, Mrs. Whatsit, it's all so confusing. Just relax and don't worry over things that needn't trouble you, Mrs. Whatsit said. We made a nice, tidy little time tesser. And unless something goes terribly wrong, we'll have you back about 5 minutes before you left. So there'll be time to spare and nobody'll ever need to know you were gone at all. Though, of course, you'll be telling your mother, dear lamb that she is. And if something goes terribly wrong, it won't matter whether we ever get back at all. Don't frighten them, Mrs. Witch's voice came. Are you losing faith? Oh, no, I'm not. But Meg thought her voice sounded a little faint. I hope this is a nice planet, Calvin said. We can't see much of it. Does it ever clear up? Meg looked around her, realizing that she had been so breathless from the journey and the stop on the two-dimensional planet that she had not noticed her surroundings. And perhaps this was not very surprising, for the main thing about the surroundings was exactly that they were unnoticeable. They seemed to be standing on some kind of nondescript flat surface. The air around them was gray. It was not exactly fog, but she could see nothing through it. Visibility was limited to the nicely definite bodies of Charles Wallace and Kelvin, the rather unbelievable bodies of Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who, and a faint occasional glimmer that was Mrs. Witch. Come, children, Mrs. Whatsit said. We don't have far to go, and we might as well walk. It will do you good to stretch your legs a little. As they moved through the grayness, Meg caught an occasional glimpse of slag-like rocks but there were no traces of trees or bushes, nothing but flat ground under their feet, no sign of any vegetation at all. Finally, ahead of them, there loomed what seemed to be a hill of stone. As they approached it, Meg could see that there was an entrance that led into a deep, dark cavern. Are we going in there? She asked nervously. Don't be afraid, Mrs. Whatsit said. It's easier for the happy medium to work within. Remember that? We covered in class, we talked about that word, happy medium. I said it's going to come up again. We talked about it being an idiom or a phrase that means to find the middle ground, not to be too excited about something, not to be too nonchalant and not caring, but find that spot right in the middle. But this sounds like a person called happy medium. Oh, you'll like her, children. She's very jolly. If ever I saw her looking unhappy, I would be very depressed myself. As long as she can laugh, I'm sure everything is going to come out right in the end. Mrs. What's-it? Came Mrs. Witch's voice severely. Just because you are very young is no excuse for talking so much, too much. Mrs. What's-it looked hurt, but she subsided. Just how old are you? Calvin asked her. Just a moment, Mrs. What's-it murmured, and appeared to calculate rapidly upon her fingers. She nodded triumphantly. Exactly 2,379,152,497 years, 8 months and 3 days. In the past, this has shown up sometimes as a question on quizzes. I wonder if it will this year. This is according to your calculator, of course, which even you know isn't very accurate. She leaned closer to Meg and Calvin and whispered, "It was really a very great honor for me to be chosen for this mission. It's just because of my verbalizing so well, or verbalizing and materializing so well, you know. But of course, we can't take any credit for our talents. It's how we use them that counts. And I make far too many mistakes. That's why Mrs. Who and I enjoy seeing Mrs. Witch make a mistake when she tried to land you on a two-dimensional planet. It was that we were laughing at, not you. She was laughing at herself, you see. She's really terribly nice to us younger ones." Meg was listening with such interest to what Mrs. What's-it was saying that she hardly noticed when they went into the cave. The transition from the grayness of outside to the grayness of inside was almost unnoticeable. She saw a flickering light ahead of them, ahead and down, and it was towards this that they went. As they drew closer, she realized that it was a fire. "It gets very cold in here," Mrs. What's-it said, "so we asked her to have a good bonfire going for you." As they approached the fire, they could see a dark shadow against it, and as they went closer still, they could see that the shadow was a woman. She wore a turban of beautiful pale mauve silk and a long, flowing purple satin gown. In her hands was a crystal ball into which she was gazing raptly. She did not appear to see the children, Mrs. What's-it, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch, but continued to stare into the crystal ball. And as she stared, she began to laugh, and she laughed and laughed at whatever it was that she was seeing. Mrs. Witch's voice rang out clear and strong, echoing against the walls of the cavern, and the words fell with a sonorous clang. "We are here." The woman looked up from the ball, and when she saw them, she got up and curtsied deeply. Mrs. What's-it and Mrs. Who dropped small curtsies in return, and the shimmer seemed to bow slightly. "Oh, medium, dear." So now that they're calling her a medium, what's a medium? Have you heard that term before? There are people on our planet that work as mediums, whether real or not. So it's like a psychic, right? Somebody who can see maybe into the future or into your past. So typically we see, you know, they have a crystal ball that they're looking in. Okay, but now we have this happy medium. "Oh, medium, dear," Mrs. What's-it said. "These are the children. Charles Wallace Murray." Charles Wallace bowed. "Margaret Murray." Meg felt that if Mrs. What's-it and Mrs. Who had curtsied, she ought to also. So she did rather awkwardly. "And Calvin O'Keefe." Calvin bobbed his head. "We want them to see their home planet," Mrs. What's-it said. The medium lost the delighted smile she had worn till then. "Oh, why must you make me look at unpleasant things when there are so many delightful ones to see?" Again, Mrs. Witch's voice reverberated through the cave. "There will no longer be many pleasant things to look at if responsible people do not do something about the unpleasant ones." The medium sighed and held the ball high. "Look, children," Mrs. What's-it said, "look into it well." que la terre est petite à qui la voit de, I don't know how to say that, de l'île. How small is the earth to him who looks from heaven. So they are looking from very far away. Meg looked into the crystal ball, at first with caution, then with increasing eagerness, as she seemed to see an enormous sweep of dark and empty space, and then galaxies swinging across it. Finally, they seemed to move in closer on one of the galaxies. Your own Milky Way, Mrs. Whatsit whispered to Meg. They were headed directly toward the center of the galaxy. Then they moved off to one side. Stars seemed to be rushing at them. Meg flung her arm up over her face as though to ward off the blow. Look, Mrs. Witch commanded. Meg dropped her arm. They seemed to be moving in toward a planet. She thought she could make out polar ice caps. Everything seemed sparkling clear. No, medium dear, that's Mars, Mrs. Whatsit reproved gently. Do I have to? The medium asked. Now, Mrs. Witch commanded. The bright planet moved out of their vision. For a moment, there was the darkness of space, then another planet. The outlines of this planet were not clean and clear. It seemed to be covered in a smoky haze. Through the haze, Meg thought she could make out the familiar outlines of continents like pictures in her social studies book. Is it because of our atmosphere that we can't see properly? She asked anxiously. No, Meg. You know that it is not the atmosphere, Mrs. Witch said. You must be brave. It's the thing, Charles Wallace cried. It's the dark thing we saw from the mountain peak on Uriel when we were riding on Mrs. Whatsit's back. Did it just come? Meg asked in agony, unable to take her eyes from the sickness of the shadow which darkened the beauty of the earth. Did it just come while we've been gone? Mrs. Witch's voice seemed very tired. Tell her, she said to Mrs. Whatsit. Mrs. Whatsit sighed. No, Meg, it hasn't just come. It has been there for a great many years. That is why your planet is such a troubled one. But why? Kelvin started to ask, his voice croaking hoarsely. Mrs. Whatsit raised her hand to silence him. We showed you the dark thing on Uriel first. Oh, for many reasons. First, because the atmosphere on the mountain peaks there is so clear and thin, you could see it for what it was. And we thought it would be easier for you to understand it if you saw it. Well, someplace else first, not your own Earth. I hate it, Charles Wallace cried passionately. I hate the dark thing. Mrs. Whatsit nodded. Yes, Charles, dear, we all do. That's another reason we wanted to prepare you on Uriel. We thought it would be too frightening for you to see it first of all about your own beloved world. But what is it? Calvin demanded. We know that it's evil, but what is it? And listen, because this will be important. You have said it, Mrs. Witch's voice rang out. It is evil. It is the powers of darkness. But what's going to happen? Meg's voice trembled. Oh, please, Mrs. Witch, tell us what's going to happen. We will continue to fight. Something in Mrs. Witch's voice made all three of the children stand straighter, throwing back their shoulders with determination, looking at the glimmer that was Mrs. Witch with pride and confidence. And we're not alone. This part's very important too. You know, children, came Mrs. Whatsit, the comforter. All through the universe, it's being fought. All through the cosmos but it's a grand and exciting battle. Everybody's fighting, not everybody, people are fighting evil. I know it's hard for you to understand about size, how there's very little difference in the size of the tiniest microbe in the greatest galaxy. You think about that, and maybe it won't seem strange to you that some of our very best fighters have come from your own planet. And it's a little planet, dears, out on the edge of a little galaxy. You can be proud that it's done so well. Who have our fighters been? Also important, Calvin asked. Oh, you must know them, dear, Mrs. Whatsit said. Mrs. Who's spectacles shone out at them triumphantly. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Jesus, Charles Wallace said. Why, of course, Jesus. Of course, Mrs. Whatsit said. Go on, Charles, love, there were others. All your great artists, they've been lights for us to see by. Leonardo da Vinci, Calvin suggested tentatively, and Michelangelo? And Shakespeare, Charles Wallace called out, and Bach, and Pasteur, and Madame Curie, and Einstein? Now Calvin's voice rang with confidence. And Schweitzer, and Gandhi, and Buddha, and Beethoven, and Rembrandt, and St. Francis? Now you, Meg, Mrs. Whatsit ordered. Oh, Euclid, I suppose? Meg was in such an agony of impatience that her voice grated irritably. And Copernicus? But what about Father? Please, what about Father? We are going to your father, Mrs. Witch said. But where is he? Meg went over to Mrs. Witch and stamped as though she were as young as Charles Wallace. Mrs. Whatsit answered in a voice that was low but quite firm. On a planet that has given in. So you must prepare to be very strong. All traces of cheer had left the happy medium's face. She sat holding the great ball, looking down at the shadowed earth, and a slow tear coursed down her cheek. I can't stand it any longer, she sobbed. Watch now, children, watch. So that's the end of chapter 5. You might have noticed that my hand went up several times. There's lots of quotes that you can choose from. There's not only one. You might even have picked out something different. And there, hopefully you were able to identify what the conflict, what that struggle, what the problem is at the end. And the key thing that I'm looking for in your answer is that you're going to explain it. Now you know, because you took a quiz on chapters 1 through 4, that there will be some multiple choice and short answer questions on your next quiz, which will be chapters 5 through 8. Each time I pointed out, this is going to be important. You want to be familiar with those parts. You'll have your book to be able to answer your short answer questions and need some specific details. So some of them might be different than what we did in our gathering evidence. All right, finish up your chart. Make sure you have complete sentences where you explain your answers, but this time you do not need to write a full answer out. You only need to complete the chart, and that chart is due the next time I see you. Bye.